The horse started running before the cowboy even realized something was wrong. It wasn't the kind of run born from fear, not the panicked, erratic sprint of a spooked animal. This was different. Purposeful. Determined. Almost urgent. The kind of movement that made the air itself feel heavy with warning. Ethan Cole had spent 20 years around horses, and he knew this one better than he knew himself. Or at least, that's what he used to believe. The chestnut stallion, named Rust, had always been stubborn, sure, but predictable in his own way. Grounded. Loyal. Never reckless. Until now. Rust. Ethan called out, his voice cutting across the dry desert wind. Hey! Easy. But the horse didn't slow down. Didn't even flick an ear back in acknowledgement. That was the moment something cold crept into Ethan's chest. Because Rust always listened. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, a sea of cracked earth and pale dust glowing under the relentless midday sun. Heat shimmered like invisible waves, bending the horizon into something unreal. And yet, Rust charged straight into it, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Ethan hesitated only for a second. Then he grabbed his hat, tightened his grip on the reins he still held loosely from the saddle, and ran after him. "All right," he muttered under his breath, half annoyed, half concerned. "Let's see what's gotten into you." But deep down, something told him this wasn't just another stubborn streak. This was something else. Rust had come into Ethan's life 3 years earlier, and if anyone had told him back then that this horse would one day lead him into the heart of the desert, he would have laughed. The stallion had been wild, untamed, furious, and broken in ways no one could quite explain. Found wandering near the edges of an abandoned settlement, ribs showing, eyes blazing with a kind of intelligence that unsettled even the most experienced trainers. Most people said he wasn't worth the trouble. Ethan disagreed. Not because he was stubborn, well, maybe a little, but because he saw something in Rust. Something beneath the defiance. A spark. A story waiting to be understood. The first time Ethan tried to approach him, Rust had nearly kicked him unconscious. The second time, he didn't get close enough to try. But Ethan didn't give up. Day after day, he returned. No ropes. No force. Just patience. Quiet presence. Sometimes he'd sit for hours, doing nothing but watching the stallion from a distance, letting the animal grow used to him. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, so slowly it almost felt like a trick of the light, Rust began to change. He stopped running at the mere sight of Ethan. Then he started watching him. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in shades of fire, Rust took a single step closer. That was the moment everything shifted. Trust, Ethan had learned, wasn't something you could demand from a horse like Rust. It had to be earned. Now, as Ethan chased that same horse across the unforgiving terrain, he couldn't shake the memory of those early days. Because the horse that once refused to let him within 10 feet was now running away from him again. Not out of fear, but with purpose. "Where are you going?" Ethan shouted, though he knew there'd be no answer. Rust crested a small ridge, his muscles rippling under the sunlight, mane whipping like a banner in the wind. For a moment, he paused at the top. And turned back. Their eyes met across the distance. Ethan froze. There was something in Rust's gaze, something intense, almost human. Urgent. Insistent. As if he was saying, "Come on." Then the horse turned and disappeared over the ridge. Ethan didn't think anymore. He followed. The climb was steeper than it looked, the dry soil slipping beneath Ethan's boots as he pushed himself upward. Sweat dripped down his back, his breath coming harder with each step. The desert wasn't forgiving, not to man, not to beast. And yet Rust had charged up here without hesitation. When Ethan finally reached the top, he stopped dead in his tracks. The land on the other side was different. Still desert, but quieter. Stiller. The wind seemed to die as it swept across a wide, shallow valley below. And in the center of it, something moved. Ethan narrowed his eyes, shielding them from the glare. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the heat. But then he saw Rust again, standing perfectly still at the edge of the valley, his body tense, ears forward. Watching. Waiting. Ethan stepped closer, his instincts screaming at him now. "Rust, he whispered. The horse didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring. And when Ethan finally followed his gaze, his blood ran cold. Because down in the valley, half buried in sand and shadow, there was something no one was supposed to find. Ethan's heart began to pound, slow and heavy, like a warning drum echoing in his chest. Whatever this was, Rust had known. That thought hit him harder than anything else. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. The horse had led him here. Ethan didn't move at first. He just stood there at the edge of the ridge, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat, as if even the air understood that something below wasn't meant to be disturbed. Rust remained frozen a few yards ahead, muscles taut, ears locked forward, every inch of him focused on the same spot in the valley. The silence was unnatural. No wind, no insects, no distant bird calls. Just a heavy stillness pressing down like the desert itself was holding its breath. Ethan swallowed hard, then forced himself to take a step forward, and then another. Each step felt heavier than the last, like he was walking into something that had been waiting for him. As he descended the slope, the shape below began to take form. At first, it looked like nothing more than uneven ground, just another patch of desert broken by shadow and time. But the closer he got, the clearer it became that this wasn't natural. The sand had shifted in a strange pattern, forming shallow ridges and dips, like something large had been buried in a hurry, or uncovered slowly by the wind. Rust finally moved, but not away. Instead, he stepped forward cautiously, his hooves pressing into the sand with deliberate care, as if he knew exactly where not to step. Ethan followed, his pulse quickening now, a growing unease curling in his gut. Then he saw it. A piece of wood. Just the edge of it, barely visible beneath the sand, grey and worn with age. It didn't belong here, not out in the open desert, miles from any road or settlement. Ethan knelt down, brushing away the loose grains with his hand. The wood was rough, splintered, and old, very old. His fingers trembled slightly as more of it came into view. It wasn't just a piece, it was part of something larger. A flat surface. A lid. A box. No, Ethan whispered, though he didn't know why he said it. Maybe because something inside him already understood what this could be, and didn't want it to be true. Rust let out a low, uneasy snort behind him, shifting his weight. Ethan glanced back at the horse, and for a moment, their eyes met again. This time, there was no urgency, only a quiet intensity, like the horse was waiting for him to finish what he had started. Ethan exhaled slowly and turned back to the object. Using both hands now, he began clearing the sand away faster, revealing more of the buried structure. The box was long, too long, and reinforced with rusted metal bands. It looked like it had been hidden here for years, maybe decades. The kind of thing no one accidentally loses in the desert. His heart pounded harder. Because deep down, he knew. This wasn't just a box. It was a coffin. The realization hit him like a physical blow, sending a chill through his entire body despite the blazing heat. Ethan sat back on his heels for a second, staring at it, his mind racing. Who would bury something like this out here? And more importantly, why? Rust stepped closer now, lowering his head slightly, his nostrils flaring as if he could smell something Ethan couldn't. The horse's behavior made the moment even more unsettling. Animals didn't react like this without reason. All right, Ethan muttered under his breath, trying to steady himself. We've come this far. He reached forward and gripped the edge of the lid. It didn't budge at first. The sand had packed tightly around it over time, sealing it in place. Ethan adjusted his grip, digging his fingers into the cracks, and pulled harder. The wood creaked faintly, resisting. Come on, he grunted. With one final effort, the seal broke. The lid shifted. And then slowly, it opened. What lay inside made Ethan freeze. For a moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. The shapes didn't make sense, not right away. It was only after a few seconds that everything snapped into focus. Bones. Human bones. Carefully arranged. Ethan stumbled back, his breath hitching sharply as the reality hit him all at once. This wasn't just a grave, it was deliberate. Organized. Hidden. The skeleton inside wasn't random. It had been placed here with intention. The skull rested tilted slightly to one side, as if frozen mid-thought, empty eye sockets staring into nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. There was something else inside the coffin. Something that didn't belong to time or decay. A badge. Ethan leaned forward again, his fear now tangled with a growing sense of dread and curiosity. He reached in slowly, almost hesitantly, and picked it up. The metal was tarnished but still intact enough to make out the engraving. A sheriff's badge. His stomach dropped. "No way," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The desert around him suddenly felt a lot bigger, and a lot darker. A buried coffin. A dead man. A sheriff. Out here, miles away from anyone. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. This was a story someone had tried to erase. Rust let out another low sound, almost like a warning this time, and Ethan quickly looked up. The horse was no longer focused on the coffin. His ears had shifted, pointing toward the far end of the valley. His body stiffened again, tension returning in full force. Ethan followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then, in the distance, movement. A faint trail of dust rising against the horizon. Someone else was out here. And they were getting closer. Ethan's grip tightened instinctively around the badge, his mind racing faster than ever now. Whoever had buried this, whoever had kept this secret hidden all these years, what if they weren't gone? What if they were still watching? The wind suddenly returned, sweeping across the valley in a low, haunting rush, lifting grains of sand into the air. The peaceful stillness from before was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Ethan stood up quickly, his heart now hammering in his chest. "Rust," he said firmly, his voice low but urgent. "We need to move." But the horse didn't move. Not yet. Because whatever was coming was almost here. And deep down, Ethan realized something terrifying. Rust hadn't just led him to the truth. He had led him straight into the middle of it. The dust trail grew thicker with every passing second. Ethan didn't need a second glance to know what it meant. Riders. At least 2, maybe 3. Moving fast. Too fast for coincidence. Out here, in a place no one had any reason to be, that kind of approach wasn't random. It was intentional. His fingers tightened around the sheriff's badge, the cold metal now feeling heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of everything buried beneath the sand. Rust shifted beside him, restless, hooves pressing into the ground as if ready to bolt, but he didn't run. Not this time. He stayed. That alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. "They're coming for this, aren't they?" Ethan murmured, more to himself than to the horse. Rust let out a sharp breath, ears pinned slightly back now, his body angled toward the approaching riders. Not fear, readiness. The kind that came before a storm. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing his mind to catch up with reality. Running now would be pointless. They'd already been seen, he could feel it. That instinct, the same one that had kept him alive through years of working the harsh land, was screaming at him. Too late. So instead of running, Ethan did the one thing they wouldn't expect. He stayed. Carefully, he slipped the badge into his pocket, then reached down and pulled the coffin lid halfway back into place, not enough to hide it completely, but enough to make it less obvious at a glance. His movements were quick but controlled, every second stretching thinner as the sound of hooves finally reached his ears. Distant at first. Then unmistakable. 3 riders crested the ridge. Ethan straightened slowly, one hand resting near Rust's reins, the other hanging loosely by his side. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't want to escalate things too soon. But his body was tense, ready for anything. The riders descended into the valley without hesitation. That told him even more. They knew this place. As they drew closer, details sharpened, the worn dusters, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, faces partially shadowed. Not lawmen. Not travelers. Something else. The man in the center rode slightly ahead of the others, his posture relaxed in a way that felt wrong. Like he wasn't worried about what he'd find here, because he already knew. Ethan felt a slow, cold realization settle in. These weren't just riders. They were connected to whatever lay in that coffin. The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop a few yards away, eyes flicking briefly to Rust before settling on Ethan. There was no surprise in his expression. No confusion. Only recognition. "Well now," the man said, his voice calm but edged with something darker. "That's a place not many folks stumble upon." Ethan said nothing at first. He just held the man's gaze, steady, unflinching, even as his pulse pounded in his ears. Behind the lead rider, the other two spread out slightly, forming a loose half-circle. Not aggressive enough to start a fight, but deliberate enough to prevent an easy escape. "Looks like I stumbled just fine," Ethan replied finally, his tone even. The man's eyes flickered, amused. "Did you?" he said. "Or did that horse of yours bring you here?" Ethan didn't answer. But that was answer enough. The man smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Smart animal," he continued, glancing at Rust. "Too smart, maybe." Rust shifted again, stepping slightly in front of Ethan now, his body angled protectively. It was subtle, but it didn't go unnoticed. The rider's smile faded. "That's far enough," Ethan said quietly, his voice firm now. "You got something to say it from there." A brief silence followed. Then the man sighed, as if disappointed. "I was hoping this could be simple," he said. "You see something you shouldn't have, you forget it, and we all go on with our lives." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "And if I don't?" The air changed. Not visibly, but enough that even the horses seemed to feel it. The two riders behind the leader shifted in their saddles, hands lowering closer to their sides where weapons likely rested. The tension snapped tight, like a rope pulled to its limit. The lead rider tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan now with a sharper edge. "Then you make this harder than it needs to be." Ethan let out a slow breath. His mind raced, not with panic, but with pieces falling into place. A dead sheriff. Buried in secret. Men who clearly knew about it, and wanted it to stay that way. This wasn't just some forgotten crime. This was a cover-up. And somehow, his horse had known exactly where to find it. "You buried him," Ethan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. The words landed. Not loudly, but heavily. For the first time, the lead rider's expression shifted, just for a fraction of a second. A flicker. Barely there. But Ethan saw it. And that was all he needed. "Careful," the man replied, his tone quieter now, more dangerous. "You're stepping into something you don't understand." "Seems to me," Ethan shot back, "I understand enough." Another pause. Longer this time. Then the man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You really don't," he said. "That badge you found? That wasn't just any sheriff. That was a man who thought he could clean things up around here. Thought he could dig into places better left alone." Ethan's stomach tightened. "And you stopped him?" The man's gaze hardened. "He stopped himself," he said flatly. "Should have walked away when he had the chance." The lie hung in the air, heavy and obvious. Ethan felt something shift inside him then, not fear, not uncertainty, something stronger. Anger. Because whatever had happened here, it wasn't justice. It was murder. And it had been buried, literally, so no one would ever find out. No one except a horse that refused to forget. Rust suddenly stamped the ground hard, a sharp, echoing thud that cut through the moment like a warning shot. His ears pinned back, muscles coiled tight. The riders' horses reacted instantly, restless, uneasy. "Easy," one of the men muttered under his breath. But Rust didn't calm down. If anything, he grew more agitated, eyes locked not on the men, but on something behind them. Ethan noticed. And in that split second, everything changed again. Because if Rust wasn't reacting to the riders, then something else was out there. Something even they hadn't accounted for. The wind picked up suddenly, stronger now, howling across the valley, kicking up sand and dust in thick swirling waves. Visibility dropped just enough to blur the edges of everything, the riders, the ridge, the horizon. And through it all, a sound. Faint. Distant. But unmistakable. More hooves. Ethan's heart skipped. The lead rider turned sharply in his saddle, eyes narrowing as he tried to see through the rising dust. "What the?" He didn't finish the sentence. Because whatever was coming, It wasn't part of their plan. And for the first time since they arrived, the balance of power shifted. Ethan felt it. Rust felt it. And deep down, even the men who buried the truth felt it too. Something was coming out of the desert. And it was coming fast. The sound of approaching hooves grew louder, rolling across the desert like distant thunder, and for a brief moment, everything froze in place. Ethan, the three riders, even the horses seemed caught between instinct and uncertainty. The dust thickened in the distance, rising into a shifting wall that blurred the horizon, and whatever was coming was moving fast enough to make even the armed men uneasy. Ethan watched closely, his instincts sharpening, while Rust stood rigid beside him, eyes locked on the oncoming storm as if he had been expecting this all along. The lead rider cursed under his breath, turning his horse halfway toward the sound, his earlier confidence slipping just enough to reveal something far more telling: fear. "Stay sharp," he muttered to the others, though his voice lacked the calm control it carried before. The two men behind him adjusted nervously, their hands hovering closer to their weapons, their horses shifting beneath them, agitated by something unseen. Within seconds, shapes began to form through the dust, dark silhouettes cutting through the haze, not one or two, but many. A group. No, a posse. Ethan's breath caught slightly as realization dawned on him. These weren't just random riders. Their formation was too organized, their pace too deliberate. Whoever they were, they had come prepared. And they were heading straight for this valley. Rust let out a sharp, almost relieved snort, stepping forward half a pace, as if recognizing something Ethan couldn't yet see clearly. The lead rider's expression hardened again, but this time it was different. It wasn't control anymore, it was calculation. He was running out of options, and he knew it. "You brought more trouble than you realize," he said sharply, his eyes flicking back to Ethan. But Ethan didn't respond, because now he could see them clearly. At the front of the approaching group rode an older man, his posture upright despite the years etched into his face, his coat worn but official, carrying a presence that cut through the chaos. A star-shaped badge glinted faintly against his chest even through the dust, and behind him rode several others. Men who looked like deputies or ranch hands, all armed, all focused. The moment stretched thin as the new riders closed the distance, until finally they slowed, forming a wide perimeter around the valley. The tension snapped into something sharper, more dangerous. The older man's gaze swept across the scene, taking in everything: the partially buried coffin, the three men, Ethan, and Rust. Then his eyes stopped on the lead rider. For a long second, no one spoke. Then the older man said quietly, "I wondered how long it would take before someone led us back here." The words hit like a hammer. Ethan's heart pounded as he looked between them, the pieces beginning to connect faster now. This wasn't coincidence. This was something much bigger, something that had been waiting to surface for a long time. The lead rider scoffed lightly, though the edge in his voice betrayed him. "You're too late," he said. "Whatever you think you've found, it won't change anything." The older man didn't react immediately. Instead, he dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the sand with quiet finality. "It already has," he replied, his voice steady. "Because now it's out in the open." Ethan stepped forward slightly, pulling the badge from his pocket, holding it up just enough for the older man to see. The reaction was immediate. The man's face tightened, not with surprise, but with something deeper. Recognition. Pain. "That belonged to my brother," he said, his voice lower now, carrying a weight that silenced the entire valley. The air seemed to shift again, heavier than before, and suddenly this wasn't just about a hidden crime, it was personal. Ethan felt a chill run through him. The dead sheriff in the coffin, the man who had tried to uncover the truth, he hadn't just disappeared. He had been silenced, buried, forgotten. Until now. He was getting close, wasn't he? Ethan said quietly, his eyes returning to the lead rider. The man didn't answer this time. He didn't need to. The truth was already written across his face. The older man took a few steps forward, his gaze never leaving the one who stood at the center of it all. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, echoing the same words that had been spoken earlier, but now they carried a very different meaning. The desert wind picked up again, swirling around them, lifting grains of sand into the air as if the land itself was reacting to the truth finally coming to light. For a moment, it felt like everything hung on the edge of a single decision. Then it happened. One of the men behind the lead rider moved, just slightly, just enough to reach for his weapon. But he was too slow. The sharp sound of a gunshot cracked through the air, echoing across the valley, and everything exploded into motion. Horses reared, men shouted, dust surged upward in chaotic waves. Ethan grabbed Rust's reins instinctively, pulling him back as the scene erupted into a brief but intense standoff. The posse held their ground, weapons drawn, outnumbering the three men who had thought they controlled this place. The balance had shifted completely now. Within moments, it was over. The three riders were disarmed, forced from their horses, and pinned under the watchful aim of the posse. The lead rider, now on his knees in the sand, glared up with a mixture of anger and defeat, his earlier confidence completely gone. The older man approached him slowly, stopping just a few feet away. "It's over," he said firmly. "The truth doesn't stay buried forever." Silence followed. The kind of silence that comes after something long-awaited finally arrives. Ethan stood there, his chest rising and falling as the adrenaline slowly faded, his hand resting against Rust's neck. The horse, once tense and alert, began to calm, his breathing steadying, his posture softening as if he understood that whatever had driven him here had finally been resolved. Ethan ran his hand gently along Rust's mane, a quiet wave of emotion washing over him. "You knew," he whispered. "All this time, you knew." Rust lowered his head slightly, letting out a soft breath, and in that simple moment, something passed between them, something deeper than words, deeper than understanding. Trust. Loyalty. Purpose. The older man turned back toward Ethan, his expression no longer hardened by the past, but softened by something closer to gratitude. "If it wasn't for you, and that horse," he said, glancing briefly at Rust, "we might never have found him." Ethan shook his head slightly. "Wasn't me," he replied. He led the way. The wind settled again, calmer now, almost peaceful, as if the desert itself had finally released the weight it had been carrying for so long. But one question still lingered in Ethan's mind. How had Rust known? And why had he never let it go? Because whatever the answer was, it meant this story wasn't just about justice. It was about something far more extraordinary. Something that would stay with Ethan for the rest of his life. And what he would learn next would change everything forever. The desert was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This time, it felt lighter. As if something that had been buried for years, something heavy and restless, had finally been set free. Ethan stood beside Rust, his hand still resting against the horse's neck, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. The chaos from moments ago had faded. The three men were now bound and under guard, the posse moving with quiet efficiency as they secured the scene. But Ethan barely noticed any of it. His mind was somewhere else. Still trying to understand. Still trying to answer the one question that refused to leave him alone. "How did you know?" he whispered again, almost to himself. Rust didn't respond, of course. He simply stood there, calm now, his ears relaxed, his body no longer tense. But there was something in his stillness, something that felt intentional, like a story waiting to be told without words. Behind them, the older man, the sheriff's brother, had knelt beside the opened coffin. The badge Ethan had found now rested in his hands again, his fingers tracing its worn edges as if reconnecting with a piece of the past he had lost long ago. The hardened lines on his face had softened, replaced by something deeper. Grief, yes, but also closure. "They said he ran," the man spoke suddenly, his voice low but clear enough to carry across the still air. "Said he abandoned his post, disappeared without a trace." Ethan turned slightly, listening. "I knew that wasn't him," the man continued, his jaw tightening. "My brother didn't run from anything. Especially not the truth." The words settled heavily between them. Ethan glanced back at Rust, then toward the coffin again. The pieces were all there now, the sheriff who got too close, the men who silenced him, the lie that had been allowed to live for years. But one piece still didn't fit. Rust. The older man slowly stood, walking over until he stopped a few feet from Ethan and the horse. His gaze lingered on Rust for a moment longer than expected, studying him in a way that suggested he was searching his own memories. Then his eyes widened slightly. "I've seen this horse before," he said quietly. Ethan frowned. "That's not possible. I found him 3 years ago, out near the old settlements. He was alone." The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another step closer, his expression shifting into something more certain now. "No," he said slowly. "Not alone." Ethan felt a strange chill run through him. "What do you mean?" The older man let out a slow breath, his eyes never leaving Rust. "My brother, he wrote letters," he said. "Before he disappeared. Said he was working a case, something big. Corruption. Smuggling. Men hiding things out in the desert." He paused, swallowing slightly, but in one of those letters, he mentioned a horse. Ethan's heart skipped. "A horse?" he repeated. The man nodded. "Said it kept showing up near his camp. Wouldn't let anyone else get close. But it trusted him. Followed him, even. He joked in the letter that the horse was smarter than most men he knew." A faint, bittersweet smile touched his lips. "Said it had a way of pointing things out. Leading him places." Ethan felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. His eyes slowly turned back to Rust. The same horse. The same intelligence. The same instinct. "It's him," Ethan murmured, almost in disbelief. Rust flicked an ear, as if acknowledging something only he could understand. The older man's voice dropped even further. "If that's true, then your horse didn't just find that grave by accident." He looked directly at Ethan now. "He came back for it." The weight of those words hit harder than anything else that had happened that day. Rust hadn't just stumbled onto the truth. He had remembered it. Somehow, some way, this horse had carried the memory of what happened here. Of the man who had trusted him. Of the injustice that had been buried alongside him. And he hadn't let it go. Years had passed. The desert had shifted. The world had moved on. But Rust hadn't. A deep wave of emotion rose in Ethan's chest, stronger than anything he could hold back now. He stepped closer to the horse, his hand tightening gently in his manner. "You were trying to show someone," he said softly. "All this time." Rust lowered his head slightly, pressing it just enough into Ethan's shoulder. And in that moment, everything made sense. This wasn't just loyalty. This was something deeper. A promise. The kind that doesn't fade with time, or distance, or even loss. The kind that waits, quietly, patiently, until the right person comes along to finally understand it. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, taking in the weight of it all. Then he let out a slow breath. "Well," he said quietly, a faint smile breaking through the emotion, "you found the right guy." The older man stepped forward, placing a firm but grateful hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No," he said. "He did." They both looked at Rust. And for the first time since this all began, the horse seemed completely at peace. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the valley as the posse prepared to leave. The truth had been uncovered. The men responsible would face justice. And the name of a fallen sheriff would finally be cleared. But for Ethan, this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Because some stories don't end when the truth is revealed. They stay with you. They change you. As Ethan mounted Rust, he took one last look at the place where it had all come together. The ridge, the valley, the patch of desert that had held onto its secret for far too long. "Let's go," he said softly. Rust stepped forward without hesitation. Not running this time. Not urgent. Just steady. Certain. As they rode away, the wind picked up gently behind them, sweeping across the sand, erasing the last visible traces of what had happened there, but not the truth itself. That would live on now. In stories. In memory. And in the unbreakable bond between a man and a horse who refused to forget. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the incredible bond between humans and animals. Because sometimes, the ones who can't speak are the ones who carry the most powerful truths.